Chip, do you think in the chat we should ask people to say what church they're from? Hey, Francis. It might not matter. Just thinking out loud. Alice is there. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. I have a staff meeting scheduled at 10 o'clock, so
Okay.
I'll just stop by to say hi.
It's good to see you.
Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll record this, so this will be up in our folders, and we'll circulate it around.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Have a great meeting.
Good morning.
Good morning, Cassandra. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
You are clear as a bell, girl.
Is that your new computer, girl? He is camera ready in studio.
There you go. I got it working with Mark's help on yesterday.
Hey, Dean. Dean chatted that he's here from Hamilton Mill.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate that. If it's not too much trouble, if you just say what church you're from, it's just nice to know, particularly folks who are not clergy, it's easy to connect. So that's
Clay. Chuck Standard, I'm from McDonough Presbyterian.
Hey, Chuck, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, good morning. I'm Clay Hudson, First Presbyterian, Monroe.
Hey, Clay.
Hey, Clay. It's good to see you.
Good morning.
How are you?
How are you?
Good.
Good morning. I'm Beverly Garner from First Pres, Peachtree City.
Peachtree City. Good to see you this morning. Thank you.
I'm John Dodds from Fayette Presbyterian.
Hey, John.
Hey, John.
Aisha, thanks for preaching for us this week. That was a wonderful service.
Our whole family was just tucked on the couch Saturday evening watching the whole service. We loved it. Everything was so beautiful. It was wonderful. Thank you. We've got Julie from Bremen. Thank you. And Camille from St. Andrews. Good to see you all this morning. Russ from Good Shepherd.
Ray is from Westminster.
Good morning.
Gary Cornell from Central.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for being here this morning. Good morning, Tony. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is Ken Torreyson. Hey, Tony. Thanks for all your help.
Hey, you're welcome, Ken. Good morning.
Good morning. And we are recording this as well, friends. So so we'll be able to circulate the
Behave.
What you say, behave?
Hey.
Yeah.
Yes, this is being recorded, so and could be circulated in different communities. So that's great. Good morning, everybody coming in. Good morning. Y'all let me know when Hamilton is here as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Every bell and whistle's going off here. I don't know if y'all are like that too. Welcome everybody for folks coming in.
Yes.
If you are not clergy or an elder or key leader, if you could just say in the chat which church you're representing, or let us know so that we're aware.
I just let Hamilton in from the waiting room.
Okay, excellent.
Hi, I'm Ken Torreyson from Northwest Presbyterian Church, and I'm the clerk and also the COVID-19 leader. And Tim could not make it today, and he asked me to substitute for him.
Excellent. Thank you for being here with us.
Welcome, Ken. Tim told me you're going to be here.
Great. Great. I see all the folks in the chat. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I appreciate that. Great. So Hamilton's with us. I don't know if he can hear us.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
There he
morning.
is.
And Bradley is here. Is Olive on this call yet?
Let me look and see.
Okay.
I think I've seen her. I don't see her yet.
Okay. Great. Great representation of churches. So glad you all are here today. Okay. Well, we've got key members of our task force. So Bradley's here, Hamilton's here, Tony's here, Erin Morgan is here. I think that Joy, is that about it for our task force?
Yes, Reverend Son said that he could not stay for our 10 o'clock meeting. He checked in and had to jump out. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't see Hodari. Was he coming?
I think so, but I wasn't. And I know James couldn't be here, so probably Olive and Hodari would be the last folks. But why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's just really great for us to gather. We're learning from even the Presbyterian meeting that people are appreciating this way of coming together to talk, to connect, to brainstorm, to hear. And so for our time together today, I'm going to open with a word of prayer. And then I'm going to hand it over to say a little bit about the group, hand it over to Bradley, who has her master's in public health, as well as a minister member here and on staff at Shallowford. So let me open with prayer, and then we will move through our time together. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this time, for the gift of technology, for the ability to come together. God, we thank you for your wisdom, your spirit, your presence that walks alongside of us. Lord, we bless all the churches in our Presbyterian, our new worshiping communities, and ask that you continue to allow us to hear your voice so that we may do your work and your will in a way that is safe and healthy. In Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. So I just want to give a thank you to the reopening to Reimagining task force. We've been trying to, when you come together with a letter that has to say a lot, it's good to do it in a group. And so Presbyterian staff had commentary. There's a midweek clergy check-in that had commentary, and out of that, we pulled some folks together. So the folks who are in that group, I want to say thanks to Hamilton Barnes, to Bradley Kibler, to Erin Morgan, to James Goodlet, Olive Mahabir, Tony Sundermeier, Destiny Williams, Francis Sun, and Hodari Williams, and Joy, who has been working with us and with this group. So I'm going to turn this over to Bradley. Like I said before, she has been such a gift to this committee, and what she did with us as a smaller group was work through each of these phases. So some of the questions you all have can be teased out as we go through it, and then we will give some time at the end as well. So Bradley, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Aisha. And hello, everyone. I have met some of you, but some of you we've yet to work together or be together. Like Aisha said, I do have my Master of Public Health, and I did that at the same time as I was getting my Master of Divinity. And so I really believe in the intersection of faith and health and the ways that religion can influence our health. And I'm not excited that there's a pandemic, but it is wonderful to be able to use these gifts in this time and sort of show the influence our faith communities can have on stopping the spread of this virus. So Aisha sent me a list of some of the questions that people have had. So I'm going to try to answer some of those as we go through and then touch on a couple at the end before we open it up. But I'm just going to start. I'm going to share my screen with everyone, so you won't be able to see each other's faces in the same way, but I think it will be helpful for us to look at the letter together as we go through. Okay. Can everyone see this letter?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. So I'm hoping that everyone's already read the letter, so I'm just going to highlight a couple of areas for you to focus on and to clarify on. So the first section is going to be right here about the gating criteria. So when we think about the gating criteria, what that means is just think of the image of a gate. And as we meet these different requirements, we can open a gate. And once we've opened the gate, it closes again until we are able to meet the next requirements for the next phase. Then we can open the gate again, and then we close it again. And sometimes we have to reopen the gate and go backwards based on the gating criteria. So the way that the CDC has managed this is over a 14-day period is how we're looking at the data. And you'll see here we've listed the Opening Up America guidelines, the Georgia Department of Public Health, and the COVID exit strategy as a way of looking at that data. So if I'm clicking on that Opening Up America again link, you're going to see what the gate looks like. So these are the 3 areas that we have to sort of check off a box from a public health perspective to be able to move into the next phase. The first has to do with the downward trajectory of symptoms or cases. Well, symptoms mainly. The second one is about a downward trajectory of cases or an adjustment. And then the third one has to do with hospitals. So are we able to treat patients? We also think about in the cases category, do we have testing to be sure we are able to catch these cases? So those are the 3 main areas that are influencing that gate opening and closing: symptoms, cases, and hospitals. Going back to our letter towards the bottom, we name that we have not yet met the gating criteria for phase 1 according to the guidelines. And that's really important to note because, as you know, we're getting a lot of different information from different places. So the Opening Up America guidelines show you exactly what the gating criteria are. Then you are able to go to the Georgia Department of Public Health and see your cases specifically for your county. Those numbers do vary, and a lot of that has to do with reporting and how long it takes testing to get to places. And then we've also found this great website called the COVID exit strategy. And it really simplifies the information for you. I've spent some time with our team at Shallowford sort of looking at the people that have created this website, and we think it's a legitimate website to look at, but it gives you an idea of where we are in the progress. So if we go into Georgia, it'll give us some information there that we are decreasing, that we're 100% at our testing target and 71% at our ICU. If you scroll down, so again, these are the same 3 things we were just talking about with the gating criteria. It gives you more information based on state and based on each category. So that's just an easy way for you to sort of stay in touch every day. It's hard, you can't watch every press conference, you can't read every article, and the goal of this task force for the Presbytery was to sort of consolidate as much information as we can and make it snackable for you to be able to retain some information. The other part that, as I was thinking about what to highlight with the gating criteria, this is the public health side of the gating criteria. But as individual churches, and we use this language a lot, contextually, you're going to have to make some decisions and build in your own gating criteria. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. Some of you I know have seen this, where we've created this prevention strategies that has a lot to do with personal protective equipment. So as you're meeting with your sessions and with your staff, you're going to need to build your own gating criteria in terms of how well prepared are you? Do you have the resources to be sure everyone has a mask? Do you have the manpower to set up the space and to sanitize it between people coming in and out? Do you have a strategy in place for recording attendance, tracking who's participating in worship, and then reporting it to the public health department, but then also to all of those people that have attended? So this is where each context is really going to have to make some decisions on their own, based on their own resources, based on their own people. So that's how I'd encourage you to look at the gating criteria, sustaining it from your own perspective, in addition to the public health guidelines that have already been mentioned. So I think, Aisha, I'm going to move into the phases, if that sounds okay to you.
I just want to make sure that people are comfortable with the raising hand feature within Zoom.
Great.
So that if you have a hand raised, it will, I'll keep up my participants box open. And I would say any other PGA staff, if you notice a hand raised, let us know if people have questions as you're going through these things. Russ has a question.
Okay.
Just a quick question, Bradley, on the gating portion of it. I know as I've looked at the data that you all have provided, Georgia is almost green other than our ICU percentage cases. But once it goes green, does that then begin a 14-day period before we get to phase 1? Or how should we adjust that?
I'm going to ask Hamilton to answer that if he is on this call and available.
I am.
Thank you.
My best, sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. My understanding is that our 14 days starts when we're decreasing. But that those days have already started clicking, if that makes sense.
So once we turn green on that particular thing, it would mean that we make the move.
Correct. We can make the move.
We can make the move. Good point.
Right.
And I would just echo that, kind of what I was talking about, the gates. We open these gates and then we close them again. Sometimes we have to open a gate we already opened and go back into the other field, because to Hamilton's point, the decreasing is not maintaining, it is it started increasing instead. Correct, Hamilton?
Correct.
Great.
And I will say this in regards to the ICU capacity, hospitalization capacity. Hospitals are starting to do other things besides treat COVID patients again. For about 2 months, we weren't doing anything but treating COVID patients. And that is opened back up a bit. So that is skewing our ICU numbers a bit, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Tony,
great, thank you.
Just to recap, Joy is saying that some states that were green went back to yellow or even red. And Tony has his hand up.
I was going to say what Joy just wrote, so it's redundant. I do think that looking at the COVID exit strategy page, if you do it in a daily way, you will see how states go green and then yellow. Like New Jersey had a few days in a row where it was really good, but now they're back to yellow because of their testing output.
I will say, like, a lot of people are saying we were progressing because we were flat and weren't seeing any new cases, but flat is not decrease in the language of the guidelines. Also, these numbers aren't reported as well over the weekend. And if you look back to Georgia's initial, like, we've had 2 days of decrease, we're going to open everything up. That was a Saturday, Sunday. And we also have counties that don't have robust testing strategies.
Yes.
Clayton County, which is a big county in Georgia, has no public health way of testing outside a healthcare facility. So these are things to keep in mind.
Yes. Thank you. For those who don't know, Hamilton is a minister member and a chaplain at Piedmont, and has been giving us on the ground in real time how things are shifting and changing. Has been a great support to this task force.
Aisha,
Yeah, sorry,
Amantha also has a hand up.
I'm sorry.
Amantha Barbie also has her hand up.
Please, Amantha.
But she's muted.
Okay. Amantha, you'll have to unmute yourself.
There we go. I'm sorry. My dog was exuberant in the front yard about something going out in front of my house. Did I hear someone say that we are at 100% testing criteria in Georgia? Bradley, did you say that?
So
She did.
If you look at what the COVID exit strategy is showing, it's saying that we have met whatever our testing target is.
That's
Okay.
per capita. That's per capita. Tony Sundermeier here. Sorry, per capita, based on the 500,000 a day criteria set by the federal government.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mm.
20% for being tested.
Say that one more time. We lost you.
That Georgia is in the bottom 20% for being tested.
Wow.
That's why I asked for clarity. Of course, we're getting different information, but I've heard that we're not doing so great on testing.
Right.
We are doing better. Sorry. We are doing better than we were. I will say that. In the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't have enough tests for hospitals to test people that even had it. Now there seems to be tests in clinics for the people that are showing symptoms and need to be tested. But you are right in thinking like, no, we're not doing like mass testing. In counties that have had like, you can come and have a test even if you don't have symptoms, they've done it for like one day and then didn't do it again. So you're right in thinking, oh my gosh, no, I can't just go get a test for free at any convenient location. As a healthcare worker, I have been tested only because I woke up coughing in the middle of the night. In the beginning, I had an encounter with a COVID positive patient, and I was told to take my temperature and watch to see if I had symptoms because we didn't have enough tests yet. That seems to be changed. Also, in regards to testing, I will say, I know y'all have watched the news. You've seen the White House and the test they were using not being very accurate. The test they're using in the hospital is a PCR test. It is the test that clinics are using. It is a much better test. It is a very accurate test. It is not the test that the White House was using.
Thank you. Okay, Bradley, I think you can thank you for these questions, everyone. This is fruitful. Bradley, you can continue.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again so that we can go through those phases together. So I had a few questions in the chat about the links that I keep tabbing to. So they are in that document that the Presbytery sent out under the Opening Up America Guidelines, the Georgia Department of Public Health, and the COVID exit strategy. So you can find those all in one place. So I'm just going to sort of go through the phases. And again, the point of our task force, or one of the points, was to consolidate a lot of information and make it easier for us to apply it as pastors in churches. And so what you're going to see on the left side are the Opening Up America guidelines. It is not all of the guidelines, but it is the ones that seem to pertain to us in particular. And then on the right side, sort of what the PGA recommendations for churches are. And these came from not only looking at the guidelines, but reading what other faith communities have done, what other churches have done. And it seems to be, we're working on joining forces with these other groups rather than trying to create something brand new. And each one of these phases is going to look differently based on your context and your church. So I really want to emphasize that we all have different resources, we all have different size of churches, and so these will be adjusted a little bit. So phase 1, which we technically have not entered yet, we recommend that churches continue holding virtual worship services only. Worship leaders should consider resuming recording in their sanctuary while maintaining and modeling 6 feet of social distancing. So what that looks like, and some churches are already worshiping in their space, recording worship in their space. So what that means is modeling behavior of keeping as few people in the frame as possible, maintaining that 6 feet of social distancing. If there's an opportunity to wear a mask at some point, you should be. And without a doubt, in between filming, you should be wearing that mask and staying 6 feet from one another. Our parishioners and our members of our churches, they are going to follow our lead. And so the sooner we can model healthy behavior, the quicker they're going to sort of catch on to what that looks like. High-risk individuals should continue to shelter in place. Small groups, Bible studies, pastoral care, everything should continue functioning virtually. And then the last one is weddings and memorial services should be kept to less than 10 in attendance, maintaining social distance guidelines and wearing masks. I want to take 1 second to just highlight this high-risk individuals. It won't let me bold that, but the high-risk individuals section. So high-risk individuals is not just our older adults, but it's people with underlying conditions of all different kinds. And that's, if you just go to the CDC COVID-19 frequently asked questions, it will give you a complete listing of all those high-risk patients, but it's not just our older adults. It's people with underlying conditions and other things like that. So I did want to highlight that. Aisha, would you like me to just go through phase 3, or do you want me to stop? And
I just wanted to add for people who are pastoring communities where there are people of color and people who are underserved in terms of health need, that this is a vulnerable population. And so this is not a time to not see color and to not see class. This is a time to really, out of pastoral care and concern, to say, I always tell people I have 3 pre-existing conditions in COVID-19. I'm diabetic, I have rheumatism, and I'm Black. So this is a time to really be upfront and to say, out of care, particularly in multicultural and predominantly communities of color, that these are vulnerable situations at this time. We do have a question from Gary. Please. Can you unmute?
I was not sure, because in reading all the materials today, I saw some reference to age 55 and others to age 65 with respect to vulnerable. I'm hopeful that it's 65 and up, but can you clarify that?
So the guidelines, official CDC say 65 and up. The older you are, the more susceptible your immune system is. So I'm not sure where you're seeing 55. Maybe that's because some underlying conditions often start around age 55. So you might be considered high risk even if you haven't hit the 65 mark. That's my best answer to that.
Thanks. I just wanted to know what was official. And again, they're in the links that are down at the bottom of the page. I started working through them, and one of the documents said 55. That's one reason I brought it up. I thought maybe that's just a mistake.
Yeah, it is hard with how much information we're getting and from a lot of different experts, and it's hard to sift through it. So my best guess would be maybe they brought it down because people often start getting underlying conditions at 55 just based on their body, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Bradley, if you could definitely go through phase 2, because there are some questions about singing in worship. So I think if we comb through that a little bit more, and then take some of those questions.
Perfect.
Great.
So phase 2, the significant shift on this phase from the Opening Up America guidelines perspective is that you move to a 50-person mask. Got masks on the mind. 50-person max. And what that means is up to 50 people wearing masks and still social distancing. So these are some of our recommendations. And as I go through, I'm going to try to address some of the questions that I saw already, and then if we have others at the end. Churches should continue offering virtual worship services. So the main part of this is many of your churches are more than 50 members, but even if they aren't more than 50 members, many of your members are in a high-risk population. So if we immediately shut down all of our virtual services, there's going to be an entire population that isn't able to worship together. Churches may consider hosting in-person worship for groups of up to 50 people. And I would emphasize again what I mentioned earlier about creating your own gating criteria from a personal protective equipment strategies. So when you feel like you are equipped to do that is when you should do it, not just because we've entered phase 2. Aisha?
Yes, Todd is making a comment, the number 50, how does that make sense in a stadium versus a chapel? I think this goes back to the point of contextualizing. I had a conversation with a pastor. They have a really large fellowship hall space. And they said the max we could do with 8-foot distance would be up to 100 people if we were lucky. So, right, I think that sanctuaries could hold more than 50 at a safe distance. Some of them could, but I think, again, you've got to contextualize. And when you look at the other dynamics that have to happen, can you safely mask stations, thermometers, isolation? Could you safely do that if somebody presented in it with 50 people or more?
Right,
So,
and just thinking about the entering and exiting part of that. So once we start adding people, I mean, even 50 people, moving them in and out, maintaining social distancing, that's going to be very difficult. So having a strategy for that. But again, phase 2 is max 50, period. So we haven't gotten to 100. It is a max of 50. So what that looks like, if you are going to begin hosting worship, you need to require social distancing and face masks for all participants. You need to find no-touch alternatives for passing of the peace, collecting and counting the offering, etc., things like that. Create a healthy hospitality strategy for ensuring compliance and preparing for sanitation. That is just specifically talking about we are now in a position where we're going to have to control members' behavior in some way, and that is difficult. And it's difficult to do compassionately and firmly at the same time. And so figuring out what your strategy is, what your staff's strategy is for maintaining that is really important. I think this is more on the infographic, but I'm specifically thinking about visitors. I'm hopeful that in this time, a lot of people have taken the time to find Jesus in their hearts, and I can imagine them driving by Shallowford and seeing cars and it's open, and I'm going to go to the church for the first time in 20 years. And then they pull up and we're like, we have to take your temperature. You don't have a mask on. We already hit our 50-person mask or max. Gosh, I keep doing that, max. So really thinking through what language are you using to still be welcoming, but also maintain the health and safety. Aisha, yeah.
We have a question from Ray who's asking, how do these numbers apply to outdoor worship venues? I'm hoping Hamilton could
Yeah, I think outdoor, I mean, what we know is that being outside is better, but that doesn't change that this is the recommendation. Having your 50-person socially distanced meeting outside is definitely going to be safer, but that doesn't mean that we don't wear masks and we don't use hand hygiene and we don't still use the same guidelines for numbers of worship.
Yeah, I would completely echo that. I think outdoor worship to begin is easier to manage for churches, simply from a sanitation standpoint before and after in a space. But it doesn't mean that all of these criteria don't still apply. But like, if you think about, if you asked your members to bring a chair to a field or a parking lot, their own chair, then they take their chair. Whereas if you're meeting in your sanctuary, you got to clean you got to clean way more stuff. So again, I think some of that's contextual. You're going to have to figure out what works best for your space and for your group. And kind of like this moment, we're all going to have to get very creative about how we reopen our doors physically. Aisha.
I think the part in phase 2, when you think about outdoor worship, is realizing that someone may still need to use the restroom inside. Someone may get sick. They may still need to have access to the physical plant if you're going to offer something outside. And in the same way, you know, when you've got the church picnic or the Strawberry Festival, you still have to be prepared. What happens if there's an emergency, or if, again, people have to use the restroom? So you still have to think through all those things, even in outdoor worship. And so it doesn't make it, it's not any less thinking or planning or detailed work stuff that you're kind of laying out inside the building as well. There's also models, I just saw this the other day, of even outside, you might even still have to mark, like to say, here, just like when you're in the store, like here's where you can sit if you're outside, and here's where you can sit. You still have to be really strategic in that way too.
Exactly, yeah. Strategy and creativity is kind of throughout this whole plan, totally. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. So remove congregational and choral singing from the service because of the increased risk of transmission. So some people have been deep in this world in the last couple of weeks, but just to take a moment on that, singing is considered a super spreader. So the way that this virus is transmitted is by droplets in the air. And when we're singing, we're breathing out over and over again. And so when I'm talking like this, what's coming out, the droplets from my mouth are not going as far as if I'm singing, they're going much farther. So singing is considered a super spreader. So in order to reduce that transmission, we discourage, along with several of the national organizations around singing, we discourage singing completely in this group setting. I'm going to share my screen. I know I'm already sharing it, but I wanted to show you a link that I was just sent that has a little infographic from the spread that happened that maybe some of you heard about in Skagit County. But it just kind of shows you the significance of what this looks like. So after choir practice with one symptomatic person, 87% of the group developed COVID-19. I think there might be somebody that is unmuted. If it's possible to mute them, that would be great.
Okay.
So that just emphasizes that COVID-19 spreads very easily and highlights how, unfortunately, singing is a super spreader. And even the testing that they've done on this, even wearing a mask, they're still seeing, because of the airflow coming out, they're still seeing it spreads even wearing a mask. Aisha.
To Todd's point, clarifying that congregational singing versus liturgical responses. From the stuff that I'm seeing, and even the infographics, there's also a link that I put up, I will put here. Someone had asked for the science around how this spreads.
I can speak to that a little bit. The virus lives in the bottom of our lungs. COVID-19 lives in the bottom of your lungs. The reason it spread in hospitals is because we're using machines that blow into your lungs and is spreading it in the room when somebody's really sick. We're doing the same thing when we're singing. We're using our diaphragms. We're using our whole lung capacity to project in a way that we don't do when we talk normally.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think that when we're talking about the liturgical parts of worship and the speaking into a mass, again, the air production does not push. I can't find it, but there's a great image of when someone's singing and I think it's in this YouTube link I just sent you, where it pushes above the mask and below, so the stuff is coming in that regard. I want to get back to, we're having good questions here. Brad Bryant has a question about childcare. I don't want to hold for a second on that. Betsy's asking a question. Preaching seems like a forceful kind of speech. Are we concerned about preaching in particular? Do we know masks of any consumer grade are sufficient? I think that somebody asked this question as well, and Bradley and Hamilton, please. But I think that if you are distanced and you are in front of the microphone and take the mask off to preach, I think that is suitable. I've also seen people preach with a mask on. Again, if you preach into that and there's a lot of distance, you still have to be clear of cleaning and what have you in that regard. Again, we're asking about praise team. Praise team, 4 singers recording and worship. Should one be singing with the mask on? I'm gonna let Hamilton say.
I think we all should be wearing masks, honestly. I think setting an example, I think when we're filming, that is one thing. But when we're meeting together, I think our congregants aren't going to want to wear the mask. We even have nurses in the hospital that are tired of wearing their mask. We have to set a good example. And if we're taking our mask off to speak and project to them, we are setting a bad example.
Yeah, it's we just had a staff meeting earlier today, and we were starting to strategize about what these phases would look like for our community. And the staff was giving feedback probably on this call. Some of them were on this call, and I said, yes, it's inconvenient, it's not perfect, and that's what this is going to be for a minute. It's not, and we've seen this and heard this, things are not going to be as they were before COVID-19 for a long time. And I think if we can take some of the fear out of it by being a non-anxious presence that wears a mask. But I mean, the group, and Aisha, I hope that you'll copy that. Is this the YouTube? Is that the choir thing? Webinar?
Yeah, National Association of Teachers.
So they said in that webinar that choirs should not gather for 1 to 2 years or until there is a vaccine. So just to say that is what I think there was 5 of the choral groups, national groups. I'm not familiar with that world enough to know exactly who they are. And they told hundreds of musicians that choirs would not be meeting for 1 to 2 years unless there was something significant that happened with a vaccine. Just to give some perspective.
Juan's asking about, again, this praise team and if people are distanced and masked or not masked. I saw an article from Tony McNeil, who's done a lot of stuff in our churches and as a professor at Clinton College, and said that people are going to have to get really, really creative, even interpolating pre-recorded music. Like, what are all the apps and things that people are doing now virtually? What does this hybrid look like? Because that's kind of what we're talking about as well, is that that same praise team can use one of those Pro Tools apps to do what they've already been doing, but how is that presented in worship? Worship may be a hybrid of what we're talking about in terms of pre-recorded music.
Aisha, do you want to read any of these?
Yes.
Okay.
Teaching effectively and setting an example. Yes, like I said, I was astounded at one of my colleagues who preached with a mask on, and you could hear her fine. It was fine. There was no problem with it. Curious about questions about the drive-in type of church. Would this still not be recommended until gatherings of 50 or less are allowed to be? I'm trying to make sure I get that right. Allison, can you expound on that? Am I saying that right?
So someone else lifted up a question up earlier in the chat about like a drive-in type of church, so like whether it's a parking lot or your parking lot, but everybody stays in their car. Curious about, where that might fall, if that would be, still a phase 2 thing potentially, or if that would be deemed a little bit safer, even in phase 1 because people aren't interacting. I don't know. Just curious to hear the task force thoughts about that.
It's funny you bring this up. There's the recording music industry has to deal with this right now. And there's a concert either coming up or just finished for frontline workers. And there were a lot of cars, and it's all, outdoor. And it still made me nervous. I thought, okay, if 10 of these people have to go to the restroom, what is the other side of it? So I like the idea of it, but I'm just curious about all the other precautions that are needed to be listed. Hamilton, please.
So I'm going to lift an example that happened this weekend at Buford. Carrie had a driving parade for seniors. The instructions were to stay in your own vehicle. You're not allowed to use the restroom at the church, and we are going to drive to the seniors' houses, and you will be socially distant because you will be in your car. The second everybody showed up at the parking lot, they all got out to greet each other. They were all in each other's car windows chatting it up. And there was clear instructions that was not allowed, and no one cared. So we have to assume that people, and this is not we like to assume the best of people. People want to come back to church. People are going to assume I'm not sick, I'm okay. I'm going to lean over and talk to my friend. It's very easy to not be socially distanced, even in a car. And you might not have your mask because you're in your car. I think there's a slippery slope here, and we shouldn't be looking for ways to skirt these rules, but ways to meet and protect our congregants.
I appreciate that.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Anna has her hand raised.
Earlier, I just wanted to, we were talking about the choir thing, just zoom in and be really clear there, because I think we sort of skirted around it. That webinar and the Presbyterian Association of Musicians are saying you can have one singer, one person, and they should be really, really, really far from everyone else. So even with masks on, 4 people should not be singing together. And our wonderful director of music ministries at Shallowford, Emily Floyd, has been working with the Presbyterian of Musicians and working out some guidelines, recommendations to send to churches around that. It's hard, as Bradley says, it's not what we're used to, but it's going to keep people safe. And until we have more information, that's where we need to land.
Is that on Pam's front page? They have COVID-19 resources as well, correct?
It's not yet, but my understanding is that it will be, that they're still fleshing it out.
And that's presbymusic.org. If you're also, that's a great resource that we probably need to add as well. Okay. Let's continue. These are great questions, y'all, and thanks for walking this path with us. Let's continue.
Sorry, I went on and was muted. I think we left off at the choral singing, so I am going to continue here with give serious consideration. Give serious consideration to options for communion and other parts of worship, of the worship experience in order to minimize contact. This might mean postponing in-person communion. So many of you have already experimented and been creative with in-home communion. The reality of figuring out in-person communion in phase 1 or phase 2 is pretty minimal. So we need to just think about what that looks like for our community. Track attendance and create a plan of action in case one of your worshipers becomes infected with COVID-19 after gathering. This is important. You need, I think there was, can't remember if it was your frequently asked questions or Aisha or in the chat, but somebody said, should that be one person that's in charge of that? I think you need a team that has a specific plan in place when people enter your campus. How are you tracking that they've joined, that they're on the campus? How are you tracking potentially where they're sitting, depending on what your setup is? And then do you have their contact information? For example, if a visitor does show up, what kind of information are you getting from them? We've just opened a conversation at Shallowford about what liability looks like here, and that's going to look different for every different church. So there's not a recommendation here about liability, but I would encourage all of you to reach out to your insurance companies and just see what that looks like. And then ultimately, if someone does report to you that they have been diagnosed with COVID, your obligation is to report that to the public health department and morally to reach out to all participants that were there at that particular time. So that is a whole package thing that takes some real thinking through for your specific church, but it's really important. Childcare, nursery, and children's church should not be offered. Children cannot social distance by themselves, and in a nursery setting, they really can't social distance. So that would naturally limit who might be able to come to your service unless parents are able or want to sit with their young kids and can sort of manage their behavior. Kind of going back to what Hamilton mentioned a few minutes ago, personal behavior is a big part of that, which is really difficult for us as leaders because we can have these amazing strategies, but if somebody just ignores the rules, we have to sort of figure out how we're going to handle that. So we need to, again, I think that's why the 50-person limit is important, because we're figuring out how to manage this to begin with.
I think,
and
Brad, I think that, I hope that answers some of your questions about childcare, that does include vulnerable, that are old, are young, people with pre-existing conditions. That vulnerable population is not as small as it sounds. There is David Lower saying something really big that I'm trying to read through. David, if you wanted to say something, you can, but if not, I'm going to pass it back to Bradley.
Well, Bradley, I would just be interested in your understanding of limitations I just learned about last night in the data reporting and some of the assumptions that are built into them. Specifically, the assumption that a positive test today reflects community spread that could have happened as long as 2 weeks ago. And when talking about these gating checkpoints, it seems like there is a reasonable approach built into green lighting that we want to see 2 weeks of decreases in the reporting before green light is administered. But I wonder, it seems to suggest reason for worry that that community spread could be happening right now and wouldn't show up in the data for 2 weeks. And so red lighting becomes really problematic, it seems to me, in that in the assumptions that are built into that reporting. And so I just, I'm trying to get my mind around, what are the implications of how the data that we're looking at is limited, and then also how it is biased to communities that are that have full access to testing and might not reflect a reality that exists differently in marginalized communities and communities of color. So I'm just looking for wisdom and guidance on some of those.
Yeah, so I'm going to let Hamilton speak specifically to the testing, just because I think he has a better understanding of that in his position. But I do want to emphasize, based on what you're saying, I think that is why we need to move slower than we feel. I know people are eager to get back, and so some people are jumping a stage because they want to get back. But to your point, the data is a little bit delayed, can be delayed. We're getting it from a lot of different influences. And so from my perspective, the church being the first back in person is not a pro. It's not a win for the church. We would rather ease in and be sure we're able to maintain those things. And that's why it will be important that when we do enter that phase one, we live there for a minute, rather than just trying to be like, phase one, let's move to phase two. No, phase one, just get in your mind that it will last at least a month, just mentally. And then, because within that month, to your point, David, we could open the gate and go backwards. There's potential for that. So yeah, Hamilton, I don't know if you want to say anything else about the testing portion specifically, though.
Yeah, I mean, you're thinking the right things, and you're right that like all this data is going through a lot of channels to get to the public health. And even yesterday, we learned that they had accidentally logged some antibody test as the PCR test. So those things are happening. They corrected it immediately. But I think adding another 14 days on there, because we know the virus you can have the virus for 14 days before you ever have a symptom. And you're capable of spreading that to anyone you're in contact with during those 14 days. So I think that is an excellent way of looking at it. Also, I don't think we should be thinking like, oh my gosh, like what if in a million years in this crazy like outside situation that somebody ends up with COVID in our congregation. I think once we start meeting, it will happen.
Mm.
And we really don't have a way to stop that. But I will highlight something we're learning from New York. New York is doing a lot of the antibody testing and of mass testing in the community and in healthcare workers. As far as our numbers, we know that at least 20% of New Yorkers out in the community have tested positive for antibodies, meaning they have had the virus at some point. Within healthcare workers, that number is closer to 12%, which is astonishing considering healthcare workers are in direct contact with COVID patients. But they're taking precautions. They're wearing masks, they're wearing gloves, they're hand sanitizing between every patient they see. So we know that the PPE works. Like, we're not allowed to be in the hospital, period, without a mask on. If I'm in my office by myself right now, if somebody came in, I would need to put my mask on. Like, these things do work. So I just highlight that to say that.
Can you clarify? Betsy wants to know what the antibody test means. Like, does that mean that there's some sort of lasting immunity? I know you spoke to us.
We don't know what it means. We don't know that you're immune to the virus. We don't know that you can't get the virus again. All we know is that you have had the virus before to some extent if you test positive for antibodies.
David, I just want to go back to your point in affirming all that is said. There's an article floating around about a church in Georgia that when the community opened that weekend of the 26th, they had in-person worship. They did all the things right. 25% of the folk had contracted COVID-19. So I mean, it's even on the best scenario, right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing from this team, from folks that are out there, that you can do everything right, but be prepared that you will run the risk of somebody coming in contact.
Yeah, thank you.
Hamilton, can you say something about reinfection? What are you hearing about people who have had COVID-19, healed from it, and got reinfected?
I don't know a lot about that, honestly. More is just people aren't getting over it. Especially vulnerable populations. They're 40, 50, 60 days in the hospital. And then going to like long-term care facilities from the hospital. We are finding we thought that you could have COVID for like a week and it would go away. People are testing positive like weeks and weeks and weeks later. Our numbers are going down, but it's because everybody has been at home. So I think the second we start interacting with each other, our numbers will go up, and we have to be prepared as communities of faith. What do we do in the meantime? I'm also of the opinion that we're doing a great job virtually. And I do think our services will look worse when we move to this 50-person, no singing, everybody sitting apart. But that's just a personal opinion. I think we're doing an awesome job right now.
Amen to that. Incredible. There's incredible worship happening all across this presbytery, and you all are reaching people in record numbers. Everybody is just reaching a lot of different folks. But Bradley, please continue.
Yeah, I would also echo that. I do think everyone is doing an amazing job adapting to this format and I think as a church, individual church or faith community, you need to decide when we get to that 50-person moment, what is the goal of coming back for you?
Mm-hmm.
And are you already accomplishing that goal virtually? Or is it going to be better accomplished in person if you're abiding by all of these guidelines? Because I do think, to Hamilton's point, what it looks like for us to be worshiping as 50 people isn't, yay, we're back together. It's a room full of people wearing masks. So thinking about your own goal of returning, what that looks like. Yeah, Aisha.
Tony has his hand raised.
Oh,
Thank
Tony.
you. I think first, Bradley and Hamilton, thank you for carrying so much of this conversation with your expertise and experience. And I know as a person on this committee, we relied a lot on your leadership, and I just want to publicly say that first. Thank you. One of the things that we're talking a lot in our community, and we just said that we're not going to have in-person or on-campus gatherings before August 1st. And we just made that decision, and we'll announce that to the congregation. We put together a survey too, just to see how people are engaging, but also to see, what are some of the personal gating that will provide psychological safety for those coming back. But one of the big conversations of late that our session dealt with, and I was pleased that they were leading on this, is around hospitality. And I think there's a theological identity piece that I think even rises above the data and the science. We would never, ever segregate our congregations, right? We wouldn't, based on their age or their symptoms. Like in normal times, we wouldn't do that. Like I've seen churches, not in this presbytery per se, but in other places say, if you're in a vulnerable population, just stay home. And what that's saying is this worship's not for you. And we're really wrestling with the hospitality piece and what it means to welcome all. And we're kind of leaning like, until we're able to do that, in a way that is as inclusive as many people as possible, we're of the opinion to just continue to carry on with what we're doing. So I just want to raise that theological piece, the hospitality piece, and the ways in which, as eager as people want to get back together, as eager as they are, we could be setting up a theological position that is actually not consistent with the gospel.
I just want to lift up, Jennifer is basically asked the question to the answer, Tony, that you just gave about the world looks like it's in phase 2, if not 3. And how do we balance that as a congregation? Hospitality, and sometimes the prophetic voices. This is a chance for the church to be a prophetic witness, to say that we will reach people, we will proclaim the gospel in the way that is healthy and safe, because we love God and because we love neighbor. So I think we're able to put ourselves in a deep theological position around hospitality, around care, around proclamation of the gospel that will not look like the world. And so I think that's okay to say that. So Jessica had a similar decision as well. Thank you. Continue, please.
Okay. So still in phase 2 here, high risk, right here at high risk individuals. And again, I encourage you to go to the CDC website, COVID-19 frequently asked questions. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but specifically so that you can identify what high risk looks like for your community. Including staff should continue to shelter in place. Clergy and staff may resume working in the church office, maintaining social distancing and wearing masks. Small groups, Bible studies, meetings may begin to meet in person, maintaining physical distance guidelines and wearing masks. Encourage continued virtual pastoral care. Any in-person pastoral care visits need to maintain social distancing, wear masks, and if possible, occur outside. And then weddings and memorial services should be kept to less than 50 in attendance, maintaining social distance guidelines and wearing masks. There's a couple things. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say that don't forget we have amazing chaplains in this presbytery. In one of our conversations in an online group, a pastor asked about, I have a parishioner at this hospital, and the chaplains chimed in. Even the chaplains are doing visits virtually. So it's just a great way to really engage the chaplains that we have on the ground. I don't know, Hamilton, if you want to say a word about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's chaplains at every hospital. You're not going to be allowed in the building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the chat last night, I didn't want to speak for another healthcare facility because I don't know exactly what they're doing, but I mean, we're on a level 4 lockdown. We're not even going to let Catholic priests in for last rites.
Mm. Wow. Got it. Bradley, I think you were going to say more about the weddings. There were some wedding questions, I think, as well. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, I laughed out loud at what Hamilton said, so I muted myself quickly.
Chip has a question first, okay, and then we'll go. Chip, please.
I know churches are struggling, some churches that serve as polling places are struggling with what to do about that. On the one hand, we want to keep people safe. On the other hand, we don't want to make it harder for people to vote. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I would be interested to hear.
Tony, can you speak to that? I think, Tony, I want to say, who else? Pleasant Hill, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know we had this conversation in other spaces.
Yeah, we're a polling place, and we're leaning toward having that opened in the space that we normally use for our community ministries. And I appreciated Aisha's language at the beginning, where we're not really talking. This isn't a reopening conversation; it's a reimagining conversation, because a lot of churches are open. I know Jessica's on this call. We talk a lot about our community ministries that are still going on. And those spaces, we have protocols and procedures, and we'll just apply those same protocols and procedures to the voting day. So there's sort of, I think, there's a moral leaning to make sure that we can accommodate for the primary, so that it's a responsibility, a way that we can steward the facility to meet those civic goals. I'd also say, just on the piece about insurance and liability, I think that's an important question that you have to ask your insurance provider. We discovered that we actually have a carve out in our insurance policy, and I'm hearing that it's more of an outlier, and I have no idea how it happened. I don't know who did it. I don't know how it worked itself out, where we do have communicable diseases covered in our insurance policy, but I'm hearing that that's an outlier position. So I think that's an important, for any gathering for people outside. I think the state would have to guarantee liability if somebody were to be sick and sue. I think that would be that'd be something for an insurance agent.
Tony, can you also, Chip, on a practical note, what happened in that offline conversation were the policies and procedures to say what would the polling place, what would they do, what were their protocols to keep the area clean? But then, Tony, I know you all took some extra measures for some of the cleaning that would happen before and after, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and this is purely because our facilities manager was ahead of the game. I think there's just normal cleaning procedures that I would hope that all of us follow just in normal times, right? Wiping down tables and chairs, etc. So all of those things are in place. The protective gear that our custodial staff is wearing to do that now, masks, gloves, etc. But we also got one of these foggers, and it's the Delta grade, what they use on the airplanes to clean in between flights, that sprays everything down. And I can put that in the chat, Aisha. I just got to find it. And we bought, our facilities director, right as this started, ordered 2 of them. Even before we made the decision to cancel worship, this was in the first week of March, he ordered these, and so we're using that to clean down spaces after use. So sanctuary after live streaming, and then our fellowship hall after our community ministries guests exit that space. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, and we'll save this chat as well. Okay, let's continue forward. And we are our time concludes at 11:30, so we want to keep to that. Hamilton is saying pregnant women are at very high risk. Thank you for that, Hamilton.
Just to also echo Tony talking about reimagining instead of reopening, all of us are still open, just in a virtual way. So that applies to every church in this presbytery. To what Hamilton was saying earlier, everyone has so creatively and enthusiastically moved into this virtual format. So we recognize that it's a return to the building, for many other people, not just a reopening. A couple of things just to highlight here, and then we'll see if we had any other questions specifically about this. The small groups Bible studies meetings may meet in person. So I mentioned earlier thinking about what your goal is for coming back together. And this is kind of like what Hamilton said. This is my own opinion about this, not the presbyteries, but I do think a Bible study format or a committee meeting is something that you could safely practice and do, and do it successfully. Worship is a little more complicated than that kind of thing. But again, asking yourself, is it worth going back? Is the virtual format really not working for us? Do we need to meet in person? What does that look like? And also knowing who's going to supervise that people are following the rules in these small groups. If you don't have a staff person leading, do we just trust that members are maintaining their 6 foot? What does that look like for you? And again, that's contextualized, and how you interact with your congregation will be an impact there. Weddings and memorial services, Aisha wanted me to touch on, and weddings and memorial services are going to look different for a while. I helped lead my first Zoom memorial service, and it was shockingly meaningful. And I think that some families are going to go that route, but there will be an opportunity in phase 2 to start meeting with less than 50 participants. So that will feel a lot like imagining what worship will look like in terms of shepherding the flock and how you'll get them in and out. You would still need to maintain the same record of attendance in case one of those people contracted COVID. You would still need people to be wearing masks. None of those rules shift just because it's a wedding or a funeral. I think the only difference would be for the wedding and memorial service would be specifically around families that are living together. So those people could obviously be grouped together. Yeah, Aisha.
I'm just watching people be really, really, really creative with the hybrid piece of 10 or less for a wedding or even a memorial service. I saw somebody from a funeral home stream a funeral, and it was 10 people, and they were distanced, and everybody two funerals for younger people, unfortunately. And so people are being very creative. Weddings, very, very, very creative. And so I think, again, the church has the power to do meaning making in this season, to say it's no less beautiful or significant because they're less physical people. And so we're just in a wonderful position with the technology to be able to offer it and maybe even reach more people who would not have been able to attend a wedding or a funeral. So just be mindful that there's a lot of creativity available, even with 10 or less, or however less for the weddings and funerals.
That is great perspective.
And Tony put in the checklist from FPC for their procedure.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just read those out loud if that's okay, Tony. Baseline cleaning checklists currently: masks and gloves for all facility staff, outdoor and indoor bathrooms cleaned with Aero hospital surface disinfectant, tables, chairs, and floors wiped down with bleach and water, and then all spaces are fogged with the Beto pH 7Q Ultra.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing that, Tony. I'm going to keep moving. I'm not actually going to read through phase 3 because the jump, I want to spend more time about talking about the jump between phase 2 and phase 3. So in phase 2, we can have a max of 50 people. And then in phase 3, we can have 4,000 people. So it is really important that your community start talking about your own, I hate that I can't highlight that, but your own contextualized, stepwise approach for your congregation or faith community. So thinking about what that looks like for you, it doesn't make sense for just all of a sudden one day you to go back and nobody to know anything. You need to think about all of this stuff we've talked about down here. How are you still going to maintain that mask wearing? Mask wearing is a part of phase 3, and there is some physical distancing, social distancing that's a part of that. So thinking about taking phase 2 and really breaking it down into different parts, I think is going to be really important. I think phase 3 we got a minute until we get to phase 3. And so I would imagine and hope, Aisha, that we would have a different space to talk about what that looks like. So I don't really want to spend a ton of time talking about, besides emphasizing that that's really going to be where sessions and clergy and staff are going to have to make some decisions about what it looks like to safely move forward into the phase.
And to also honor the ways that what you're doing right now is powerful and effective. It's reaching people, it's proclaiming the gospel, it's keeping them safe, it's church in a new way. And so I think keeping that balance as well. Bradley, could you move us into, there's some questions in particular around what we're taking temperatures, go through that infographic, and I think it can help, but questions like what would taking temperatures and offering hand sanitizers and masks look like, ushers and greeters, how do you avoid cross-contamination? Somebody said, this concept reminds me of washing the feet of the guests in biblical times. What a great way to frame that. So I think if we could walk through the infographic and just help people imagine what it would look like to have different kind of stations and what have you.
Can do that. So again, I know I keep saying your context, but I just want to emphasize that because everyone in this call is coming from a different space. So my vision of what it looks like might not work for yours. So be thinking on your own context. So the first couple things on here are face masks and hand sanitizer. So it will be a requirement for members to be wearing face masks. And so you need to think about confirming that participants that show up have a face mask, but also having your own face masks. So if that means ordering some on the internet to be able to hand to people or to have out for people to grab, or if that means having a ministry of people that make masks to be sure that everyone has whatever makes sense for your context. That's going to be really important to preventing the spread. The next thing is hand sanitizer, having that available. Access to soap and hand sanitizer will be crucial. Purchasing or collecting it. Some churches love to do drives to collect it, and I think that's a great way to do it. It gives some people have that stuff at home that they want to share. And you're going to have to think based on your setting and setup where you're going to put those, how people are going to use them, who can access them. Is one person squirting the bottle? There is not going to be a perfect way to do this because we are imperfect people doing the best we can. And so the point is to just be strategic. I think that strategy word is really important. So what can you do to minimize the most contact? Yeah, Aisha.
Can you guys say something about, I understand that, masks can be made and, gotten that people can have their own and providing. Hamilton, can you guys say a little bit more about the access to hand sanitizer? I know it has looked different in the local store. I'm not sure industrial size or when you're ordering from, other agencies that support nonprofits. So I just want to know what you were seeing in terms of access to hand sanitizer and masks.
I mean, I will speak about like me in the store. I haven't seen it in the grocery store. From a real life thing, the hospital ran out of bleach wipes for a couple days, and everybody had to start doing like the bleach bottle and paper towels. I mean, even healthcare settings are we're having to be creative with how we sanitize things.
Yeah, and they are some masks considered useless?
The data is that surgical grade masks have a better success rate than homemade masks. Part of it probably is like we're all using different fabrics and they're made differently. So, but if you look at like what a mask is doing, essentially what it's doing is if you have the virus and you're wearing a mask, you can't spread it as easily to somebody else. And if both those people are wearing a mask, you are protecting yourself even more. The funniest cartoon about this is like the guy who's like, if I'm not wearing pants and I go to the bathroom, I'm going to get it on you. If I'm wearing pants, I get it on myself. If we're both wearing pants, you're dry.
Right. That's right.
But yeah, so we don't have data on the mask your sewing group makes.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them.
Right. I think a barrier versus no barrier. Everyone having a barrier is a much better way to go than the alternative of nothing. James asked, can the Presbytery collect status of each church in terms of their decisions concerning in-person activities? We already have a grid that's kind of stagnant right now because everybody's pretty much doing online. We're going to keep that grid, and then when it starts to flip, like we started to show all of you that went from in-person to online worship, and then everybody's online. I think that same grid can be utilized to work in the other direction. Andy is asking the question, somebody said, thanks Hamilton for that visual, the fans. Andy's asking the best practices, for recommended for gathering outdoors. Andy, that is on this video. And again, we're talking about space. We're still talking about all the things you'll have to consider to sanitizing and people not obeying even outdoor rules. That was a conversation, Andy, that we had, unfortunately, that we can't control behavior. So let's keep going. Thank you. We've got the meme in there. Let's keep going through these infographics because they're really helpful. But because we were at sanitizer, I was just going to say that might be the indicator, right? That you're not ready for 50 people together because you can't even get hand sanitizer. So these are some of the things that people will have to consider as well. So please continue.
Good point. And Hamilton, I'm about to move into the temperature checking. So before I do, someone asked, is that a HIPAA violation and what does a high temp mean?
It doesn't mean you don't have, so like you can have the virus without having a temp. But it is an indicator that if somebody is coughing and they have a temp, they probably have it. But I'll also say, we're getting temp checked like every time anybody enters the building. And I was talking to a nurse practitioner who works in one of the doctor's offices mainly. She's a member in the Presbyterian as well. And she had a great example of we're keeping people honest. If they know if they think they might have a temp and we're not checking, they might decide to come anyway. But if they know we're checking and they don't feel well, they're gonna stay at home. It's using these infrared forehead thermometers, like there's no touch. It's like a gun. You shoot it at their head and it gives a reading. They sometimes do malfunction, so I'd recommend buying at least two. So if one breaks in the middle of like getting people in the door, you have a backup. They're not expensive. They're like $40. But
I would emphasize too that our church bought one like a month and a half ago, and it's nowhere to be seen yet. So this is something that you should go ahead and place your order on because they aren't just showing up quickly. And then Hamilton, I've struggled with this too, so I don't have a great answer. In terms of HIPAA, us taking people's temperature, knowing that data, Does that involve HIPAA at all? Is that a
I
violation?
mean,
What's your perspective there?
I don't see how that's a violation of HIPAA. It's not like we're looking in their medical record.
Right.
It's just a rule for, this is a rule for coming here today.
Yeah, and so then on top of that, I would say later on, there's a section in this infographic that talks about managing member expectations. And I think that would just be one of them. If you show up for worship, we will be taking your temperature. These are the 5 things to expect.
There's also one of these questions that says, who would submit the numbers and names of attendees to health agencies? And should this be overseen or an individual, like a group? Hamilton, I think, and Bradley, we said that we would do a separate infographic after this meeting to say if someone is high temperature or has tested positive for COVID-19, here are the things that you should do. Is that correct?
I don't think you would be required to do anything if someone had a high temperature except send them home. But if somebody reaches out, we're not diagnosing COVID as people are arriving. We're just trying, if you have a fever, that could be an indicator of you being any kind of sick. So we're going to send you home. But really, we won't know if someone has COVID unless they have told us. So that would also be an expectation we would need to set for members, that we need you to report for the safety of our church and the health of our church.
I want to speak real fast about the guest book thing. It was just mentioned, like, we shouldn't be sharing a pen. We can have somebody taking this information from somebody on a pad of paper or a laptop or an iPad. The vehicle for taking the information doesn't matter, but we can't have a book that everybody's breathing into and sharing pens.
Yeah. And this is the digital stuff that we're talking about as well. Ray also asked, if someone has a temperature, are we refusing admittance? Yes, unless there's something wrong and they can't physically leave themselves. In that case, it's isolation space and you're calling 911 if they can't drive themselves home or something has happened to them. And so
that goes back to that hospitality language we talked about earlier. How do we say to people, Jesus loves you, but you got to go?
Yes.
Which is hard. Another idea for the attendance and reporting section was you can create a Google Voice phone number. So if you wanted to have a moment in your service where people use their own phone to text a number that they were in worship, that's another way to do it. It's not exactly as accurate. If somebody doesn't report that they're there, then you are missing that. But it's just another way to not have people writing using a pen, like Hamilton said.
Yes.
Okay, the last two, so I think we've kind of talked about attendance and reporting, so I'm gonna just talk about setting up your space and managing member expectations. So have a plan, a strategy, as I keep saying, for physical distancing, both for entering, both for worship experience and for exiting, whether that's inside or outside. What does that look like to maintain? How are you engaging people to help foster that distance? If it is inside, removing Bibles, hymnals, offering envelopes, etc. Those are just things people can touch, and it is another thing people would need to clean, and an easy way for that to spread. Consider adding a screen or a TV monitor into your worship space instead of using paper bulletins. Open all doors to eliminate transmission via doorknobs, so that goes without saying, and then have a strategy in place for sanitizing before and after worship. So these are just a few of the ideas, but pews, railings, doorknobs, microphones, there might be chairs depending on what your context is. Really have a team think through what that's going to look like. Okay, and last, managing member expectations. So I think this is where our pastoral muscle is really going to work the hardest, because we're going to have to find a way to be firm and compassionate at the same time and emphasize that it's all about maintaining safe behaviors. So in the weeks leading up to returning, be sure to contact your members with specific guidelines of what to expect. If they need to know that you're going to be wearing a mask while you preach or while you're waving to them, they need to know that there will not be any song that we're all singing together, that there won't be passing of the peace. They need to know that the offering plate is going to be a basket at the back of the worship service at the very end, or that they have to do it online still. We need to sort of manage their expectations to decrease their anxiety about returning. So I kind of just said all of that, but let's see if I forgot anything.
No,
High-risk members, we would ask them to continue worshiping virtually. And again, I've updated this because it's not just 65 plus considered high risk. It's, as I mentioned, people with underlying conditions, emphasizing there's not going to be a lemonade or a coffee hour of any kind, that it will be you arrive and you leave. Many of us have parking lot lingerers. And so figuring out how to manage that, how to manage parking, period, to limit some of that is important. And then, as I mentioned earlier, consider how you will welcome and communicate with volunteers. So how you open your space really is up to you, but thinking about, are you going to do A to F can come at this time, and then we're going to have this break to sanitize, or are you going to set up a sign-up genius for people to sign up and just leave a little extra room in case someone random shows up? And then, importantly, what is your language for people? If you hit your 50-person mark at that point for phase 2, what are you going to say to someone? And for some of us, like, you might not be returning in phase 2 the way other churches are returning. So maybe your return is 100 people. Same thing. What language are we using? Who are the people in charge of being sure that those people feel love, experience the Spirit, but also maintain sort of the guidelines and rules that you've set before you?
Yes. Just want to answer a few more and then open it up for some continual questions. Someone asked, could the larger presbytery help setting up permanent projector screens in the sanctuary, materials, templates, training? I definitely think we are here. We did our tech basics training in January, and I jokingly have said to a couple of people, if I had to pick a theme, this was back in January, February, if I had to pick a theme for 2021, it would be virtual and vital, and what does it mean to be a 21st century church? I didn't know we'd have to jumpstart in March. So this presbytery is here, this Reimagining group is here to talk about what hybrid worship is going to have to look like. This is a global conversation that is being had in real time right now. Every house of worship, multi-faith, all across the world is asking how we are safe when we're in person, but also what we make available for people when they can't be publicly in worship. Betsy is saying some of our Jewish colleagues are accustomed to reservations for worship. That's right. At which point is it not worth coming to church? Will we lose people because of it? Chuck, did you want to say more? Can you unmute?
Yeah, I'm just curious. We look at all these criteria we have to meet, and I'm a pharmacist, so I'm a healthcare. I understand all the criteria we have to meet and all that. But at what point does it become, say, hey, it's just not worth jumping all the hoops for me to come to church? And eventually, I'm afraid we're going to lose people because the connection we have, physical connection, we're going to lose that. We can't get that virtually. I know it's great to have it and everything, but it's just not the same. But I just wonder at what point do people go say, hey, I ain't going to church anymore because, it ain't worth it. I'm going to go to the lake instead. So, each I guess this is not just one question. I guess it'd be for each session, each church to decide, hey, this is, what point do we have to say, okay, these are the criteria. Is that going to are we going to lose people for it, or are we going to bring people in for it? So just curious, how are people thinking?
Chuck, I think language is really, really important, and making sure that people know that we are worshiping together, but what's the risk for in-person worship versus virtual? And so I think, we are at time. I'm getting my Presbyterian clock has the bell, the internal bell has rung. But this is not the end of the conversation. And I think that, you know, for people who want to keep having it, talking about how are we going to reimagine? Because I just want to say this and we can start coming to a close. But I just got an article about an all virtual worship experience that reaches 70,000 people weekly. And so it's just, we just have to start reimagining while we don't have a vaccine, what is our outreach and connection? Because I think if you all could see, you're probably reaching more people than you have in a long time. And so just making sure that you're helping people frame and getting that language to say, we may not be doing in-person worship, but we are doing great worship and connectivity and having folks. You could be at the lake, just tune in at 11 o'clock or Saturday at 6. You know what I mean? Because we're family. And so how do you keep doing that? I'm gonna bring this to a close. Bradley is sharing another.
It's just the infographic on its own without the 65 plus if people wanted to just have that to use for something.
Excellent. So friends, we want to thank you for being on this call. This has been recorded. Thanks again to the Reopening to Reimagining Task Force. Special thanks to Hamilton and Bradley and all those. Their wisdom and insight has been phenomenal. And thank you to the staff as well. So could someone close us in prayer? I'm going to ask Chip if he would not mind closing us in prayer. Yes,
Me?
yes please.
Okay, all right. Let's pray. God, we thank you for all of the people who are gathered here, for your presence in our virtual midst. God, as we face difficult decisions which affect the lives of so many people, may your Spirit continue to guide us, to grant us wisdom and compassion, and make us strong in the face of pressure to do things when we just don't feel that they're in the best interest, sometimes of the people pressuring us. God, we thank you for Bradley and Hamilton, for the wisdom they have shared with us, and for all of the members of the task force who have worked so hard to put together these guidelines to help us in our discernment of your will for your church writ large and our particular churches. And God, we ask that you would continue to bless us and all those we serve. Keep us safe and healthy. And may we feel your presence and our connections, even if electronic, to those we love. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. You're muted.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being on with us. God bless you. We're going to work on a frequently asked questions sheet, and we will get this video posted as well, so you can share. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the information.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Be blessed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bradley and Hamilton, you guys are incredible. Oh my gosh.
No, I'm glad we could help.
Thank you.
I hope we didn't say anything wrong.
No. I think people, we had, Chip, what did we peak at, about 60 something?
65 was the highest I saw.
So I think that people, I'm going to stop recording.